In speedruns of Ratchet and Clank Rift Apart, there are a fair few techniques that we use across all of the different kinds of runs that we do. The game's triggers are made in such a way that discoveries like out of bounds or sequence breaks are often not all that useful, since we have to hit the triggers in a specific order, which means that a lot of the runs are based on general routing along with abusing movement tech. This video is aimed at newer runners, with the goal being to teach them all of the movement tech, not the routing, so I recommend that new runners watch the current world record of the category that they want to run before or after watching this video to get the current routing and also to see what tech is used where in that run. Before I go through the tech, I'm going to very quickly go through the settings and show you what yours should look like for when you are doing runs. For game difficulty, I always recommend playing on the lowest difficulty, unless the run that you're doing has to be on a very specific difficulty. For any percent, this makes it so you can't die whilst in combat, and it makes enemies shoot at you a lot less. It doesn't really affect New Game Plus all that much, but there's currently no point in having the difficulty set higher. I also have tutorials, weapon wheel pause, and both of the level up options switched off, as most of these just cause the game to go slower at points. I recommend fire mode to be set to hold, and also have hover boots auto pump set to on. To help see that the game triggers are being hit correctly, I also have the waypoint to my current objective active at all times, and I also have subtitles switched on. In the controls and shortcuts menu in settings, you can rebind your D-pad buttons to some useful functions. The options on screen are the ones that we use throughout runs, and they can be assigned in any order, so have them set up in whatever way works best for you. The skip cutscene shortcut is used during almost every cutscene, since it's faster than going through the pause menu, and you can actually often use it earlier than you are able to pause, making you skip the cutscenes a lot faster. The other three shortcuts need a bit more context, so I'm going to go through those once they come up in the explanations of the tech that they're used in. And since we're talking about pause menus, I'll also mention this. When you pause the game, you are almost always able to select restart checkpoints. We use this at certain parts of the run to either skip some time waiting for something to happen, or to teleport ourselves to a more favourable position. Now I'm going to go over the basic movement that's used in the game, starting with the earliest and slowest stuff that we can do, and then ending with the latest and fastest stuff. The fastest movement that you can do at the start is simply to sprint. You can gain an extra frame of forward movement by doing a single jump during these sprints, but since you have to do 60 of these in a run to only save a single second, don't worry too much about them. This very quickly becomes overshadowed by using Phantom Dash spam, since we get the Phantom Dash fairly early on in runs. You perform Phantom Dash spam by pressing the dash button, jumping near the end of the dash animation before it starts to slow down, and immediately pressing dash again. This keeps you at max dash speed for a lot longer than just using the grounded dash over and over again, and it's fairly easy to do, so you should use it wherever possible. The final general movement upgrade that we get in the game comes in the form of the hover boots. Even if you can't do any of the tech that's in this video, you should always be using the hover boots whenever you can, as they are easily the fastest form of movement. Now I'm going to go over some miscellaneous tech that's just useful to know. If you have any kind of extra speed when grinding on rails, the game will quickly try to put a cap to that speed. You can avoid this by staying airborne whilst grinding, simply by performing a lot of jumps. This becomes very strong when you combine it with tech that I'm going to go over later. If you're trying to make a jump but you're barely missing the ledge, you can do an attack in the air to perform a hyper strike. These give you a small height boost, along with keeping you moving in the air a little bit longer, which makes some jumps a lot easier to make. These can be further enhanced if you are doing the hyper strike during a mid-air jump, like during a double jump, by holding the jump button during the attack. This makes you float even higher and longer than normal, and is known as an extended hyper strike. And now, we're getting into the actual tech, and the first thing that I'll go over are wrench boosts and backwards wrench boosts. But first, a disclaimer. The frame rate that you're playing the game in affects the outcome of both of these techniques, so to avoid giving you all headaches, this video is rendered at 30 frames per second. To let you know what the current setting is, I'll be putting a little box in the bottom right of the screen showing what the frame rate of the current clip is. When you're using the hover boots and you're at max charge, if you go against any nearly vertical wall, hold L2 and attack, you will gain a large amount of speed. This is easiest done while using the slowdown function on the D-pad, which also gives the wrench boost a fair amount of extra speed if you use it. The slower the game speed, the more extra speed that you gain, so it's worth using 30% speed over any of the others. The speed that you get is determined by both the angle of the wall and the angle that you are facing the wall. If you're going directly into or directly alongside the wall, these gives you the least amount of speed. The perfect angle is around halfway between these, but any angle that's between the extremes will work for you. If you're on 60 FPS, then you get even more speed with these, in some cases making them nearly twice as fast as 30 FPS. These can be practiced anywhere with a wall, but I recommend that you learn them on Sargasso, right around here, as it's close to the ship and it's quite hard to die whilst practicing. The only things to be aware of with this tech are that you have to be at max hoverboot charge, and you also have to be holding L2, otherwise the tech won't work. Backwards wrench boosts, on the other hand, are possible without a wall, albeit slightly harder to perform. Once again, to make this tech work, you have to be at max hoverboot charge as well as holding L2. You perform an attack, and then flick the left stick backwards at a specific time, and then forwards at a specific time. This can be very awkward to do at first, so to best practice this, I recommend that you split it up into parts. You want to find yourself a corner, boost into it and get to max charge, hold L2, and the first thing to practice is timing the left stick after attacking. Whilst practicing, to start off, instead of flicking the stick backwards, you want to attack and then hold the stick backwards instead, and you want to move the stick immediately after attacking. When you do this right, you will get a double attack, and this double attack is what causes the extra boosts. To get the timing down to actually flick the stick back instead of holding it, you want to slowly increase the delay between attacking and holding the stick backwards, until you're doing it the moment that the double attack happens. At that point, you want to do the exact same thing for flicking the stick forwards afterwards, so that you're holding backwards as little as possible. You want to flick the stick forward as soon as you can after the double attack happens. Finally, after the double attack gives you a boost, you want to input another backwards wrench boost as soon as possible by attacking once again, and then flicking the stick backwards and forwards. This lets you chain them together and gain a huge amount of speed very quickly. Whilst wrench boosts give you much more speed on 60 FPS, backwards wrench boosts give you much more speed on 30 FPS, but again, both of these settings are able to use this. For both wrench boosts and backwards wrench boosts, you're able to instantly and drastically change the angle that you're moving whilst keeping almost all of your speed by doing a jump in any direction. This isn't used all that often, but it is needed in a couple of tricks, so it's worthwhile practicing. During certain cutscenes, we aren't actually able to skip them, and your character is just standing, waiting for the cutscene to end. We're able to move during these cutscenes by using the melee combo shortcut that's on the D-pad. This can save a minor amount of time by just having you closer to your objective once the cutscene ends. But on Blizzard specifically, if you were to hit one of the crystals, you gain full control of your character afterwards. Hitting the crystal again lets you return to the intended version of Blizzard, and you still keep full control. If you're able to cope with the camera moving during the cutscene, you can just carry on with the route, though this can be very tough, depending on what you're trying to do. The next tech is called photo mode abuse, and uses the photo mode shortcut that's on the D-pad. If you press the touchpad to bring up the map screen, start holding the photo mode shortcut, then close the map screen, the game will open photo mode, and the camera will be very high in the sky. Whilst this is happening, all the currently active actors, an actor being a character or an object, are frozen in place, but timers aren't frozen, so anything that happens after a certain amount of time will still happen. Essentially, the game is unpaused, but all of the actors are kept in a paused state. Doing this during a cutscene keeps all actors frozen in their starting position, and if you let the cutscene timer end, this puts actors in these starting positions after the cutscene. The camera is a bit different during cutscene photo mode abuse, but that's a good thing. The camera is frozen in place in the cutscene at the point where you did the photo mode abuse. Once the camera goes flying off into the sky, this is the indicator that the cutscene has finished and you can close photo mode. Doing this can put enemies in places that they were never meant to be, which can cause them to die instantly. This also includes bosses. Some good examples of this are the Juggernaut fight at the end of Nefarious City, as well as both of the Roger fights that are on Torrent 4. Another use of photo mode abuse is during a hyperstrike, and this gives us an infinite jump. Simply do a hyperstrike, and before your character starts plummeting, initiate photo mode abuse. Wait for roughly 1.5 seconds, and then cancel photo mode, and your hyperstrike will think it's hit the ground, but you will still be in the air at the top of your jump. The camera shake is a good indication that the hyperstrike has ended, but this doesn't always happen during infinite jumps. Once the animation of the hyperstrike ends, the game will treat it as if you've just run off the edge of a ledge, and it will refresh your mid-air jump, your mid-air phantom dash, as well as your hyperstrike, which means that you're able to loop this over and over indefinitely. Because of how slow this is, it unfortunately has limited uses, but it's still quite neat and it is still used in runs. You're also able to use photo mode abuse to stack arena matches together, which has uses in all collectibles and 100% categories. When you interact with the console, you want to back out and then quickly interact with it again. You then choose one of the arena matches that you want to stack, wait until the camera starts to move away from the console, and then initiate photo mode abuse. Because Rivet stays by the console during photo mode abuse, once the cutscene has finished, you're in front of it, and you can interact with it again and select a second arena match. You're also able to do this multiple times, that if you stack too many at once, the game will crash. You still have to complete each of the arena matches normally, but this lets you make progress on multiple matches at once, making it a fair amount faster. For example, you can stack both of the Mangler matches together, and complete them at roughly around the same time. There is something that came along with being able to skip cutscenes using the D-pad, and that's cutscene speed. During certain cutscenes, when you use the skip cutscenes quick slot on the D-pad, your character can get a good speed boost coming out of the cutscene. You do this simply by skipping the cutscene at a certain point, and using the left stick, you angle and move your character in the correct way. You can also do a jump out of this to keep some of the speed, but also gain a little bit of height. And as this is a fairly recent discovery, new uses have been found quite often. This next tech uses a feature of the PS5 itself, and we call it Create Mode Abuse. Normally, if any of the PlayStation menus are open, you're not able to control a game in the background. However, if you're in-game, start holding any button at all, and then bring up the PlayStation menu, you still have some control over the game whilst the menu is open. What you can do during this varies game by game, but thankfully for us, we can do some fairly cool things with it. Please note that you have to be holding any button the entire time that a PlayStation menu is open, but you are able to swap the button that you're holding easily if need be. For example, if you started whilst holding L2, but you need to use L2 for something, you could say hold R2 and then release L2. Personally, I use the Create menu for this as it's easier to see things, but this also works exactly the same with any other PlayStation menu. During this, you're able to bring up the pause menu, the map screen, and the photo mode menu. There are a couple of things that we're able to do with this. You're able to do a version of the photo mode abuse with this by opening a PlayStation menu, opening photo mode either by the shortcut or through the pause menu, and then closing the PlayStation menu. If you were to open photo mode first, then open the PlayStation menu and close photo mode whilst keeping the menu open, the game will resume play in the background, and you have full control of your character. If you then open the pause menu, the game will keep running, but the pause menu will be up, which makes you lose control over the character until you unpause, but it also lets you change any settings whilst the game's still running. The final tech that I'll be explaining in this video is known as dialogue skip. This uses Create menu abuse and is used to skip a few long lines of dialogue. You can use the pause menu, photo mode, or the map menu to do this, but I prefer the pause menu as the others require a little extra to work and take a little bit longer. Dialogue skips work by skipping over a character's dialogue by storing the end of a previous line of that character's dialogue. A big use of this is on Ardolis, when rescuing Pierre. Once rescued, he starts a long line of dialogue before he lowers the ramp to let you progress, but this is skippable with dialogue skip. When you first reach the big platform that Pierre is held captive on, he starts talking. You can use this dialogue to skip the longer one by opening the pause menu during this dialogue, activating Create menu abuse, closing the pause menu, then closing the PlayStation menu. If done correctly, this makes the audio go a little bit weird, and the end of Pierre's line will not fully trigger, and it stores the trigger that he's finished his line of dialogue, and we use that later on. Just a quick note, if you ever open the weapon wheel, this will resume Pierre's dialogue and cancel the tech. If you manage to beat everything and keep this state, when Pierre would start his long line of dialogue, the game sees that he's supposed to have finished some dialogue, and immediately triggers the end of his current dialogue, which then triggers whatever happens after that dialogue, in this case, the ramp lowering. You can do this on any line of dialogue, but it's only beneficial if you can trigger that character to speak again without needing the end of that dialogue, and if the dialogue that you would skip triggers something. An example of this not working is with Junkbot, just before you do the glitch puzzle. If you store his first line of dialogue, Ratchet will never start the line that follows it, so the dialogue is never concluded, and you can never interact with the terminal that has the virus. However, with Pierre's example from earlier, his next set of dialogue was triggered by an in-game event, which then allowed the trick to work. And that's the end of the video. Hopefully this video has been of some use to you. I highly recommend joining the Ratchet and Clank Speedrunning Discord and dropping by the Rift Apart channel if you have any questions. There's almost always someone there active that will be able to help you with any issues that you have. Until next time!